I didn't know what I wanted, and I didn't know what education meant. So I felt like a failure pretty young. Most of my growth has been incremental growth. So on my journey, I learned that success leaves clues if you're looking for it. We're looking for things out there, and I never, ever use the word potential. I find that to be the most meaningless word. It doesn't matter what your potential is. Imagine you died and you had on your gravestone, she had potential. I only say that to put our finger on what can often stall us. How much could you improve by? Not much, yeah. If you want to create 100-fold expansion of value, you must gain the cooperation of other people.
Hi, I'm your host, Reena Suri, and welcome to Thriving Changes. What if the key to your next level of growth isn't something you need to learn, but something you need to uncover? In this episode, Tom Rosenak invites us into a deeper conversation about leadership that begins from inside out. Together, we explore the unseen forces that shape our decisions, the moments that test our values, and the inner work required to lead with integrity. If you've ever wondered how to grow without losing yourself along the way, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. Hi, Tom.
Good to see you, Reena.
I am so grateful for your time and for being here, your willingness to hop on this journey of mine. And I'm really thankful from the bottom of my heart.
You're welcome from the bottom of mine.
Thank you. So we've actually had quite a conversation in the last few months around human development, culture, organizational culture, change, leadership. And I've been really enjoying our conversations.
As have I.
Yeah, and I really wanted to dig in and know a little bit more about what you do and how you got into this work. And that's where I'm going to focus largely.
I'll start with my company name because it ties back to how I got into this work. So my company is called Diamond Mind Enterprises, and it's a riff off the famous Acres of Diamonds speech given by Russell Conwell over 5,000 times to raise money for Temple University. And the speech is, the short version of the speech is, there was a gentleman who had a ranch and someone came through and said, the way to riches is diamonds. So he left his ranch in search of diamonds. And he became bankrupt, destitute, ultimately killed himself. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, as they say, his family lost the ranch. The new person was walking along the stream and they saw a little glint. And they picked this up and it looked nice, so they put it on the mantle. That same tradesman came and said, you have the largest diamond I've ever seen. And he said, I thought it was a pretty crystal because they don't come polished. He thought it was an interesting stone, didn't know. And so it turned out the first rancher was sitting on acres of diamonds and left for greener pastures, searching for diamonds in the world instead of developing the diamonds that were right there. So we all do that. We're looking for things out there. The first step is to take ownership of our own acres, however small they are. And so there's two parts of my business. And one is, and I got into it on presentation skills, and I'll tell that story in a little while. But the first part of it is connecting to your inner diamonds and being clear about what kind of a ranch you want to have, taking responsibility. And then the second part is expressing that in a way that attracts other people. So that's what leadership is, this idea that people want to go somewhere compelling with you. But if you haven't polished your diamonds, you can only use power leadership techniques because compliance. But what we want to do is we want to have a group of people who have similar values, who want to create something bigger than themselves. The word corporation just means body. And hopefully the body's moving in the same direction, but not always. So the Acres of Diamonds is the bedrock of all that I do. And I never, ever use the word potential. I find that to be the most meaningless word. What difference does it make? Each of us is not currently using or leveraging our diamonds the best we can. So we can start with one diamond better polished. You're working at McDonald's, whistle and wear the hat, and all of a sudden you get a raise. You can always expand value. That's not the way our culture thinks about it. So I don't, when people use the word potential, I'm only telling your audience this. I don't argue with it. I just never use it myself. I know what people mean, but I don't use it because, in a sense, it doesn't matter what your potential is. Imagine you died and you had on your gravestone, she had potential. Your kids would still love you and you still have a valuable life, but it wasn't your potential. It's that you actualized love in your life.
That makes so much sense, Tom. I'm now rethinking about how many times have I used that word, but hearing you, that makes so much sense because yes, I might have potential, but if I am not maximizing what I already have, then I can never actually tap into that potential that I have and reach a certain level.
Yeah. You outgrow where you are. And again, I don't correct people who use it, so you don't have to go back and scrub it. I only say that to put our finger on what can often stall us. Really, it doesn't matter how much something costs until you've decided to buy it. For example, if I happen to love a Maserati and I said, I'm going to go price it, they don't have to use techniques on me because I can't afford it. But if I came up with an exact number, that would only be relevant if I really had a burning desire to have a Maserati. Then I start asking resourceful questions. What kind of person would I have to become to be able to walk into a Maserati? And if that motivates me, I would say, what value can I generate that would be worth more than a Maserati? And so it's about resourceful questions because human beings are incapable of assigning value until they compare it to something else. So my point is just, let's take a look inside and let's find our values, who we want to become. Then let's tell the truth about where we are, and then have a process to move from the energy of the values into the outer world in an expanding way. That's much more empowering.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So I didn't even ask you to introduce yourself, and we jumped right into it.
You asked a question and away I went. You're going to have to take charge, so that's...
I know. I got tuned into it, but anyway, can we have that introduction now?
We can. My name is Tom Rosenak. My company is Diamond Mine Enterprises. I live in Chicago, Illinois. Literally, for years I said that, and I lived in Evanston, Illinois, but now I am in Chicago. My wife retired, and we live in Chicago. And I got into becoming a human development professional around 1992 when I had a job offering that required group presentations. And at the time I said, I can do one-on-one, but I'd rather die than give a group presentation. My nerves were all messed up. And I wanted to take a Dale Carnegie course, but I had 3 small children and I didn't have enough Federal Reserve notes to come near it. And I found a church basement course, which I still teach as a volunteer, called the Christopher Leadership Course. And it was founded by a Catholic priest and a Dale Carnegie instructor. So it had some elements that were similar and some that were different. And not only did I learn to speak in front of groups, but I found I loved it. So I stayed on as a volunteer. And then I started saying, I wonder if you could make money teaching other people how to speak. So that was my first gainful employment. I was helping a small consultancy teach their classes. And then I started my business in 2009, which is more coaching. So that's a real brushstroke. But I've been a human development professional since professionally since just before the turn of this century.
Okay. Who do you work with? Is it individuals, companies, teams?
Yes. So I have three different pillars, if you would. I have one-to-one momentum coaching. I wrote a book called The Momentum Playbook that helped people get unstuck and into momentum. But I do executive coaching in large corporations, primarily, unless I know the people, primarily as a bench coach for large coaching organizations. Most of my work in training is at the team level, not enterprise level. And so I do training in what we call the persuasive arts. That would be sales, presentation, influence without formal authority, and conflict.
So, how did you get into this? How did you get into human development?
I can answer that with one word: failure. And I grew up with two lawyers. And when my mom was a lawyer, there weren't many women in that profession. I think there were only two in her law school class. And so I had two lawyers, and they were not wrong, but they said, you got to get an education. And let's see how I can say this gracefully to your audience. I sucked at school. That's as graceful as I can get this time of day. So I had this inner tension because my mom said, do your homework. And I didn't know how to do my homework. And I started feeling stupid and all of those kind of things that went with it. And I won't go through the whole pity party, but I didn't know that I love learning. It's one of my favorite things because I associated it the way I experience education. They drill a hole in your head, they put a funnel in there and pour stuff in, and the closest what comes out of your mouth and your hands is the grade that you got. I didn't know what I wanted, and I didn't know what education meant. So I felt like a failure pretty young. And I saw this little book, and somehow this title caught my eye. It was Dale Carnegie, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And I picked that thing up. I don't remember my age, and I remember the aha moment where I said, I didn't know that you could change the frame of thinking and reshift things. Like I thought worry was something you either did or you didn't do. And living was something you either did or you didn't do. I remember an interview with the Dalai Lama. Never forget this moment too. He has this glow and this smile, and he's fully present, and I know he practices present. But here's the line that I loved. They said, you seem very happy. And he paused and he said, I practice happiness. I didn't know it was a practice. I thought it was something you get the job, you're happy. And actually the root word of happy is happenings. So it is the way we experience it. This happens, not happening. This happens, happy. But the word that he would use would be joy. I saw this book and it opened up this idea that I could choose my responses to. I wouldn't have been able to say it in that language. Back to that moment, the door that opened was twofold. One, you can reframe your life in a way that it happens differently. Never knew that before. And two, if you decide to do that, you need to take responsibility. And responsibility up to that point was my mom, and she was not wrong, said, do your homework. And I didn't do my homework, so I was irresponsible. And that's as far as the dance went. She wasn't wrong.
I want to know what self-leadership is and how did it impact you? What ownership did you take in your life to help you move forward? When did that transition happen?
So most of my transitions, that was a defining moment. And I probably have 6 of those. Becoming sober in 1980 was really defining. But most of my growth has been incremental growth. So that opened the door, but I didn't just charge through it. I pretty much lived the way that I had lived before, except I was taking in new information and at least thinking about formation. But following the trail of failures, I needed a job. I got a job selling billboards. And I hated that job. I didn't do very well. And I can remember instead of making sales calls, I would be reading Agmendino and other stuff. So I was already beginning to study. But I got a clue. And that is there was a top salesperson, and I haven't kept in touch with him, but I'll never forget his name. His name was Steve Lutzheiser, and he was one of the top performers. And when he would have a call with an ad agency, he would pull me in the conference room. We'd have a cup of coffee, and I always seemed to be able to help him know what to do. And he said to me, "Why are you 29% of the quota? And you seem to know how to do all this." What I didn't know then was that I had a gift for coaching and teaching. And I did it just because I had enjoyed helping people. I didn't know it was a career path. So way back in 1990, whatever that was, 90, 89, I already was interested in coaching and training. And then I was pretty close to getting fired at that same company. And I was 29% of quota, like I said. And so failure is how I got into this whole thing. And I said to him, my manager, who said, "You should talk to your wife and be saying, because you're not going to be around here very long, and you're a good guy, and we don't want you to surprise fire you one day. Start getting your resume out there." And they were giving me that little buffer time. And I said to him, I said, "I noticed there was a selling skills seminar at McCormick Place in Chicago, a big conference center, and Tracy. And I went to his seminar. I asked my boss, and I was nervous asking because I'm already not making enough sales calls and I'm on my way out the door. I said, "Would it be okay if I took a day off and went to this selling thing?" And he said, "Sure, all for it." He said, "I'll even pay for it." And I went from 29% of quota to he's taking me to a Bulls game saying how good I was doing. And I can still remember just a couple of the suggestions he made. So on my journey, I learned that success leaves clues if you're looking for them. Remember, one thing he said, "If you want good results, hang out with people who are getting the results you'd like. Most people hang around other people that aren't getting results." And I looked at it, other than when I helped Steve, I wasn't taking him to lunch to learn what he did. I was coaching him how to handle a difficult agency conversation before I had any training. I want to bottom line it here and say that I looked or listened, and I was hanging out with people that were saying the problem in sales is the management is pricing it wrong. The customers are paying, and all of the problems were out there. None of us had any sense that it was up to us. It was always something's wrong with the economy, it's no good. Something's wrong with the pricing. Something's wrong with the management structure. Something's wrong with my neighbors. And I noticed this disease is even more rampant now. The problem's always out there. And Wayne Dyer once said, "If you think other people are your problem, you have to wait till all of them go to psychiatrists before you can get any better." So the answer to your question is, and I've got more stories, but it was always something that wasn't working, and then the reawakening of my responsibility, and then the deciding what I wanted to do. And the one that set me on a course that never, and it always changes, but I tell people whenever I'm having business transitions that I am a human development professional. And I learned that at about 40. And so I would see these offers when it wasn't working good at this little company I worked for. And since that time, 20 some years, it's always about empowering others to take greater responsibility. And that's the thread that runs through everything I do.
It's so powerful because looking within, and the whole mission this podcast is all about, that very often we ourselves are in our own way and we need to work on that. And instead of looking outside into the world, we need to seek within.
Always starts with self-leadership.
Yeah.
And the second answer to that question that you asked, and I don't remember how you asked it, about self-leadership, is the idea of an inner CEO. When I coach, we always want to talk to the inner CEO. And she's the one, when you think about a CEO and not the function of the job, but the core responsibility has only really three components. And they're all present in self-leadership. One is connecting to the vision. Two is connecting other people to the vision. And when it's self-leadership, it's connecting the different parts of us to the vision. So we aren't monolithic. We have a part of us that just wants security, and they put security as the highest value. And so they never make phone calls, that part of us. And so if we're trying to be integrated, we have to have conversations. We don't want to be reckless, but the voice of security sees making a phone call as an existential threat. You can't live in this world and be protected from everything. So connect to the vision, align the inner parts, which is similar to a CEO aligns the teams. And then the third is allocate resources. I have done a horrible job in my life and continue to in some ways of allocating resources. And the energy goes if you poorly allocate it. And I don't just talking about money. I'm talking about all resources. So worry fits in there. Worry produces nothing and it zaps resources.
Can you expand that a little bit with an example so that people can understand?
Sure. So we get 168 hours a week. And you don't get more for being smarter. And you don't get more for being good looking. Time management is a myth. I'm in favor of productivity courses. By all means, learn how to be more productive. But what's the best you could get if you improved your productivity? How much could you improve by in terms of the value you produce if you only took it from productivity? Any thoughts?
Not much.
Not much, yeah. If you want to create 100-fold expansion of value, you must gain the cooperation of other people. Now back to how that applies to self-leadership. And that's what a company is. Say, okay, Henry Ford wants to put 8 cylinders on a block. And he said, well, I'm not that good an engineer. He had to get engineers. Disney had the vision of the mouse. I mean, we could give hundreds of examples, but you want a more specific example from my world. And this would be trying something, maybe it's a marketing initiative or something, without setting up any metrics of when I'm going to revisit it. If you revisit it too soon, you make one call and say, that didn't work. That's not, you need to have a plan that includes evaluation. And the inner CEO has to notice this tendency. I invested $12,000. It excites me. It's not producing any results. Maybe if I put another $10,000, it would work. They call that chasing good money after bad or bad money after good. We do this on the emotional front too. And so if you tell the truth about where the energy goes, then you can reframe it and you can shift the energy to put it on what matters most.
When you said that I did a poor job of allocating resources in my own life, can you give me one example of where you were investing, which resource was not working, and where did you shift it to?
I think the emotional misinvestment of resources is far more impactful than the financial. So the best example I can give where there was a success is when I first got into business, I thought I didn't have the money to partner with other people. And so I was trying to learn QuickBooks. I was trying to learn sales pipeline management. I was trying to learn all of these different things. And my reason that I would give you is I can't afford to get help on this. So no matter how much time I spent on QuickBooks, I would be less than mediocre at it. I was still closing out the books from the year before. Like I just kept putting it off and putting it off because I hated that kind of thing. So how much energy did I put in trying to, I can't quantify it, but I can tell you it made me not want more business. not consciously, but unconsciously, because I started seeing business as a hassle. I would even say, I'm okay on the training side, but I don't like the business side. So it's about awakening to what you can do, what you should do, what you need to learn,
What you need to delegate.
and what you need to delegate. And then once you say, I can't afford to get help on this, then if you say, what would it cost and what would it take to be able to afford it? That's resourceful. Remember, I said before, it doesn't matter what it costs. If she's $50 an hour or $300, until I've decided I'm going to get help, let her charge whatever she wants.
A mentor of mine, he used to always say this: rather than working in the business, you rather work on the business.
That was Gruber's book, The E-Myth.
Okay, it's from there?
Yeah, so Gerber was the one that published that book first, and now there's whole franchises around it.
Okay.
But yes, so working on the business. And in our talk of self-leadership, the business is just the output. It is working on ourselves to align the amount of RAM, psychic RAM as well as time, chronos as well as kairos time, that is spent on what matters most. And so when I gave you that confession, I had frittered away a lot of time. And I used the word fritter because I never really made a decision to do it or not to do it. It just became a thing. And so then you got to do it, and you do it, and you gripe, and you do it. It's frittering because if I decided for 6 months I'm going to try this process, then I'm going to reevaluate it, and I'm going to have coffee with my friend Rena, who has great analytical skills, and I'm going to make a decision. I can live with the decision. That 6 months didn't pay, or it could be a little shift would make a big difference, or it could be drop it altogether and move on. I can live with whatever that is, but I've decided a process. And so many times I didn't do it. So 3 years later, I said, I shouldn't be doing this. I bragged about I was getting a certification every year because I love getting a certification year. And one time I woke up to myself. It was a time when I didn't really have the funds and didn't want to travel. And I said, I love learning. I love certifications, but getting another certification that I'm not going to use for anything is not a good investment of time.
Yeah. It's reminding me of a lawyer friend of ours. His wife is a very good friend of mine. And she once shared that story that they were having a conversation about, every household has a conversation on budgeting, that where can we cut expenses and what can we do. And one conversation was about landscaping, and he hates it. And he said, and he's a lawyer, what he gets paid per hour is a good amount of money. He said, I'd rather go and hire help for that 1 hour of work. He will earn much more if he goes and works for a client.
And so if we're honest, and I will be honest, and our listeners can decide for themselves, many times we use what we can't do as an excuse to not have to face what perhaps we should do and can do, but we're not sure. And so we hide behind. And I have a sticker that I had on my laptop for years. I might put it back there. And it's, what can I do? Because I can generate a list of all the things I can't do and the reasons I can't do it. And it's a long list. But there's always something you can do right where you are with what you currently have to move something forward.
Yeah.
And if you've decided to get a virtual assistant, what you can do is you can put together a plan to be able to afford it. It's better to work on yourself. But here's where it's a play on it. The way to work on yourself is in yourself. So we're flipping the E-myth for personal leadership. And that just came today. That came from you. I never thought of it that way. Is to go to work in yourself. Not so much on yourself, in yourself. And the way you work in yourself is you process whatever resistance there is from the light of the inner CEO, who is aligned to what you're trying to become. Augustine said it this way: see what you are and become what you see.
Mm. So that means defining the success, that what does that future look like and what does success mean to you, is an important part of this equation.
May I introduce three definitions?
Please.
And what I want to encourage everyone to do, we throw around words, is be clear what you mean when you use the word. And most people never define success. It might be success is getting the A, or and failure is getting the C, but that's event driven. I heard this definition of success from Earl Nightingale years ago, and it's changed my life forever for the better, which is success is a progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And so what that means is, and that was before I had the momentum process, is you're always moving, not just towards it, but from that, from the very heart of a worthy ideal that isn't fully expressed yet. And that's a big part of momentum, coming from, because when you're going towards something, it's like the horizon. You can keep walking and you just as far away as you were till it sets, and they go, there is no horizon anymore, and you got to wait a whole day. But this is coming from the energy of the wish fulfilled into the world of gravity, friction, and mortality. But the most important thing in that definition is something bigger than yourself, worth being, worth dancing with, worth becoming. Because in man's search for meaning, Viktor Frankl noticed the people who had something bigger than themselves to live through did better in the prison camp than the ones that just wanted to survive. And that launched his whole psychiatric career. Man's Search for Meaning, one of the best books I've ever read about this. And so ponder, why are you on the planet? And don't start with your SMART goals. Start with your values. Start with who you want to be, what you want to become. Then you think of the goals as stepping stones in the journey, some of which you will succeed at, some of which you will not succeed, but you can't lose because you are progressing and you're connected and aligned to a worthy ideal that's bigger than you. You can fall, but you can't fail. That's what purpose is.
That's what purpose is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different ways to say it. Simon
Yeah.
Sinek, start with why. Purpose is the big why. The biggest why is, why are you on the planet?
So I often hear people say that it is one of the most difficult things for them to define their purpose. What would you advise? Let's say, what has your experience been with yourself and with others that you coach? How do people come to that, to identify that purpose within themselves?
I think if you're stuck there, and I learned this back in the nonprofit world years ago when I didn't have many Federal Reserve notes clinging together, but I'd watch people come through this 10-week class and they were stuck. They couldn't find a job, or they couldn't, whatever their issue was. And what we discovered, we would say, is there somewhere you can volunteer? And stories would come back. I volunteered and I ran into a woman while we were getting the vegetables ready or whatever for the soup kitchen or whatever the thing was, and she said, you should talk to my husband because he's hiring now. She didn't go there to find a job. She went there to be of service. So what I would say to you, if you were stuck with your purpose, is join someone else's purpose that interests you. Don't be in charge. Go and find a purpose worth serving. Then that will challenge you to become more. And then while you're becoming more, you might say, I don't want to start my own soup kitchen, but I like this element of it. I wonder where you could find this element, but not that element. And then you play around. If something is not immoral in of itself, then it is a place to explore your purpose. And so it could be a fast food restaurant, it could be whatever. So you don't have to define your purpose to find it. You find it by one, believing it exists, and two, seeking it. The scripture says, seek and ye shall find. And I heard this once and I liked it, which is mankind seeks the qualified. God qualifies the seekers. So one of the reasons people get stuck is they think they have to be able to clearly articulate it and they're under pressure. They had a wonderful marketing coach who said, you've got to get your core values articulated and you got to do this. And it's an exercise in a workshop. And I've led them and I'm in favor of them. So I'm not bad mouthing them. But then they feel terrible because they went, it was a good class and she was a great teacher. I still don't know my purpose. That's not the way it comes, like an elevator speech. I'm on a mission to end the elevator speeches forever. They're a colossal waste of time. You go to the networking meeting and all these people, you can tell they had people guide them and they had the right words, but there's no spark there. How about an old-fashioned conversation? Yeah. Someone bright-eyed like you, and just to say, you know how people sometimes struggle and get, yeah, I know how that is. It's just very conversational.
Yeah. That's what I have also learned, that it's all by trial and error, that it's the things that I enjoyed doing. And when I did them and one conversation led to another, or one explore common thread somewhere, that I could link, that from one aspect from this, then another aspect from another, and then another aspect from the third experiment. And then it became like a path.
If you had to know all that before you walked on the path.
That, exactly.
So there's many people that are frozen, and there's a corridor theory, which is get out into the hall, because there's clues out there that you won't, if you sit in the room to try and figure it out. And today we're now back to this information. You're with your computer, you could just do this for the rest of your life. Yeah. And you got to get out there.
Yes. Meet people, have real conversations.
Yeah.
I say, that your purpose is your North Star and your values are your compass. And decision-making, choices, they become so much easier if we can identify our values, what are our non-negotiables. And then we know that, all right, this is something that I don't want to do. This is not something that interests me, or this value. If it's getting compromised, then I need to get away from that activity, right? But you also know where you want to head. And so those choices become so much more easier. And you experiment. They also say that clarity comes with action. It doesn't come with just sitting, like how you said, right? You have to get into the hall to find those clues.
If I may, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm right tracking with you. And I want to put these other definitions in there because they tie together. So what we just learned is if you don't know what your purpose is, go really big. I'm meant to serve. Then find a place you can serve. Don't say this is what I'm going to do when I grow up. This is just what I'm going to do Wednesday night. And now I'm back to what you said. Success is paying attention to the clues. And you might say, I'll never do this again on Wednesday night. But I like this. Boundless curiosity. I wonder if there's a place that has more of this. And so you play around with it. But your definition of purpose is big. I want to serve. Because that doesn't cut off all the possibilities. And if we specialize too soon, then we'll constrict. So I want to serve. And so then that becomes both your compass and your North Star. I'm on the planet to serve. But I also need to make a living, and I also want to enjoy my work. And so there's all these other considerations. And so then you start playing around with it. I want to define another word. This has helped me, and I hope it helps your audience, is the word strategy. When I'm in a workshop and I say, what does strategy mean? Someone will say plan. And plan is the output if we're having a strategic planning, but it's not what strategy means. And when I heard this simple definition of strategy, it changed my life forever for the better, which is strategy is a question. What are you counting on to win? Now we're back to self-leadership. How do you define a win? And so when people are trying to design a career before they get to the non-negotiables, other than the obvious moral ones that are non-negotiable, but in terms of likes and dislikes, they just start with what would winning work be like? And then they come up with things. I'm not meant to be solo. And that's when I changed from trying to do QuickBooks and all this other stuff and started working with others. And the first step was on that year, I think it was 2012, I worked under 5 different banners because I realized that the client really didn't care. And so if I were teaching for Sloan Communications or somebody, I would show up as their company and use their stuff. I don't hide that I have Diamond Mind. I don't pretend that I'm an employee, but I'm teaching her content. And so all of the marketing is her marketing. And I'm paid as a contractor. That was a hard thing for me to get used to, just because everybody was working so hard on building their brand and stuff. And I believe in a brand. But if I can teach your class because you double booked and I take a percentage of it, it's a win-win thing. And so I had 5 companies that I worked for that year. And I realized then another change happened. I always believed I won't do something that I'm not able to do really well. So I would refer it out. And so it would be like this. The first time I learned this, it was project management. I had my friend Sandy who said, Tom, we'd like to have you teach our project management class. And I said, Sandy, I've never completed a project. That'd be a huge mistake. And she said, oh, but they really like you and they like the way you teach. And I said, that would be the end of that because we'd be out by 9:30. I know nothing about the subject. And so what I did was I referred her to someone who was good. What I learned from that, though, is rather than refer her instantly, I now have a different approach, which is I would continue to do discovery, making you comfortable. I promise you, I will never show up and teach a project management. But what's driving this need now? And so they give me more context. Sometimes they think they need a project management class and they don't. And sometimes it might be something in my sweet spot, but I'm not quick to hand the business card out. Instead, I will say, would you be willing to get on a call with Sandy and I? And they say yes. And if it's something that's in her sweet spot, she does it under Diamond Mind banner. That's a total change in philosophy.
This is what you're talking about, is reframing the mind.
Yes. So I'm clear on 2 things. That one is I'm about leadership and I'm about human development. And so I have a client who's a CFO, but I don't help him with CFOing. And if he has CFOing concerns, they don't come from my network because I don't spend a lot of time networking with CFOing. And I'm in favor of peer support groups and all that, but I don't want to be in one that has to do with CFOing. So it's just, that took me years to learn that. I'm almost going to cry. I squandered so much time because I kept on doing the same thing. I have shortened the time it takes to decide things like this. Still not as short as I could make it. I still fritter the time, but I have a process to say, this isn't it. And then it's not about quitting. It's about reframing, asking what's out of alignment. I have a process, and the speed to those changes are quicker. And part of it is I don't have that many more years for gainful employment. I can't afford. I used to be on the 10-year plan. I don't get that many more 10-year plans.
You're funny.
True.
So what is the process to win then? What's the win?
So the first step to winning is clearly defining a win. And I'll give you a hint. There is always, this is a quiz, how often?
Always.
Good, right answer. You get the A. There is always a subjective and an objective element, which is why when I use SMART goals, I use Blanchard's motivating instead of measurable. And I'll tell you why I do that. And so first I'll give you how I use it. Specific, which most of them do, then motivating, then attainable, which means it should be a stretch, but not so much that you won't even get out the door. So you got to break it down. And then here's your North Star. It's got to be relevant. So relevant to what? The bigger picture, whatever that may be. Could be global, it could be team, or it could be individual, but it's got to be relevant. And then trackable. And why I like this, I've seen people do for the T, time bound. I've seen people do for the M, measurable. They're trying to make it all objective. But if you have ST, which is specific and trackable, then you can have all the measurements under T: time, money, people, resources. You don't need another objective. Yeah. So specific and trackable is always objective. But motivating, now I'm going to tell you why this is important. Motivating is subjective. If I were to come in and there were 8 people in the conference room, and I were to say, we need 36,900 by the end of the year. And then I go to the water cooler. All 8 people have a different perception of what it means. And all 8 people understood exactly, I forget the number I threw out, 36,800, doesn't matter, I made it up. So there's nobody that doesn't understand what that means objectively. But one person said, oh, that'll be a piece of cake. Another said, I better quit my job. No, we'll never do that. And every kind of story in between. So if you don't have a subjective component to the win, you aren't going to gain buy-in, which is why most corporate change initiatives fail, because they're not communicated in a tailored way to the different teams, to the different perspectives, to the different individuals. And so they get really brilliant analysts, and I'm not being facetious. These people wow me, these OD analysts. And they do this work, and they found inconsistencies, and they get a new org chart, and they do all of that stuff. And that's all good, and I'm not demeaning it at all. But then the communication is often, we got to roll this thing out, and it's about pushing out messages. And there's never a time that all 2,900 people need the exact same message, unless it is the Christmas party is at noon on this date. It's got to be that or 36,500. But if you have any kind of change initiative, people are going to feel out of control, and you have to help them seize control. And that requires much more communication than they do when they, quote, roll out this. Remember my dear friend at one of these big companies, she came to me and she said, what do you think about the new org design? And I said, I didn't understand the last one. I only worked at this company at the team level, but I didn't understand what the heck they were talking about. And neither, though, that's not scary because I'm an external contractor, but neither did the 8 people I was coaching.
What did you mean by motivating?
Good word. So we measure drives. So the word motivate just means move. And so if I want your buy-in and I can't ask for your compliance, I have to present it in a way that moves you into whatever it is. And so this isn't universal, this is individual. I remember I was teaching at a company and they had this front parking spot. It was in Dallas. The weather's pretty good. And they had this front parking spot, salesman of the month. And I heard in the class several people say, I don't really care about that. That didn't motivate me. I like to get my exercise. I like to park in the back. I don't want my names in light. Just show me the commission. There are other people, they'll bust their tail feather to get their name on the sign. So it's the same objective thing. Be the top in sales and you get a sign for a month. So what do I mean by motivating? Is it moving people to gain greater alignment with whatever it is you're doing, or is it pushing them away, or is it neutral? It's an influence strategy.
To bring it all together, that means that's where you are, the persuasive art. to bring all of them on board with such different track measures or different
Different wiring, different drives, different
drives,
motivators, different needs.
needs. So help me understand now. I guess this is where I will close and bring it all together, is that help me understand how you do it. Like when you're talking to teams in these larger corporations, and there are so many different people that have to come on board with this one single idea or a single goal that they're working towards. How do you do it? How do you bring so many people? What is that persuasive art that you bring in?
So I will define it simply. And to answer that question is really a 3-hour question, but I will give you the short answer now. Principled persuasion is positioning the value you bring against what they care about. So the first step is understanding their concerns. And you may have to have a sequence of conversations. You may have to push out one idea and realize that's not going to do it, and then ask who are stakeholders that can have some conversations. Maybe we need a listening tour. Now I'm getting too much on the how to. But most influence attempts are poorly positioned. They're not poorly worded. They're just not positioned against what is on the runway with the people you're trying to persuade. So ethical influence, and you have the 6 principles of influence to help guide asking questions. And the most powerful one here is the law of contrast, is to say that until you know what they're comparing it to, you can't say it's better than the old way.
So, what are the 6 principles?
So the 6 principles, and Cialdini outlines them, and now they've added to them. And what that comes from is social science. And all the principles can be used ethically or principally, or they can be all of the despots and dictators and crummy people, cults, they all use them because they work. And so if you watch marketing, you'll see them. So likability is the first one, which is, do they like you? Do they trust you? Are they inclined to believe you? So we want to raise the receptivity to your ideas. And then the most instant one is this contrast, the law of contrast. Nothing's either big or small, expensive or inexpensive until you compare it to something else. So you have to be careful. You hear this on the nonprofit where they say, it's just as much as your daily latte. They're trying to give you a frame of comparison. And I often say, I'd rather have my latte. The next one is social proof. As much as we talk about how we are different, we tend to do that which other people do. So who else is doing it? So if we will brag about people's success, many people will go, oh, I could do that. So you can model it. A leader models it by behavior, by doing more of the things. But is that, and so then the next one is authority. And so if you wear the uniform, you have a perception of authority. So it's like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend. It's like authority. And people often say, I'm very low on the ladder. And I said, well, you might have authority, which is information you have that they don't have. And they might actually be executives, but that one piece of information is going to make the difference in their meeting. You have a lot of authority. Now, you don't power up on it. Commitment and consistency. And so this is powerful.
Commitment and consistency are together?
Yeah, it's sometimes just called commitment, but consistency ties in there for leadership, which is people will tend to act in a way that's consistent in what they have said or done before. Tied with social proof, it's what other people have said and done before. So it's understanding how do we use this in influence is we get them doing most of the talking, and then we summarize and say, you mentioned that the team fulfillment is one of your most important values, and you nod your head. Then I take my idea because I've opened you up. Now you're an intelligent woman. You may not agree, but remember I mentioned the receptivity meter. If you picture a meter with the dial, when I repeat what you said was important and you nod your head, you're listening differently to my idea.
Yes.
Then I say, this will result in greater team cohesion. Now, if I just come into you and say, I have an idea that will result in greater cohesion, you may still agree with it. And in the first case, you may still disagree with it, but your receptivity meter is in a different place. And how inclined are people to accept your ideas? That's why I don't like the limiting word likability. It's more really about receptivity to you. And I prove this in right in the class. I said, there's somebody that you could send an email to and just say, I have a couple ideas I'd like to bounce off your head. And they'll say, yeah, let's meet for coffee. And there's somebody else that if you sent them that email, they won't respond at all. They don't even ask, what is your idea? So you're at a different place. So knowing how far you need to move always starts with discovery. I feel like I'm teaching an influence class now. I'm over time. I'm talking to
No, so I have likability, contrast, social proof, commitment, and consistency, receptivity, and you just
Well, I really use the receptivity as part of
like
gauging likability.
okay. And you said 6, so we still have at least either if likability and receptivity is same, then we have 2 missing.
This is the very currency of civilization. It's the law of receptivity, reciprocity.
Oh, yes.
Reciprocity. I forgot the most obvious ones. And it gets manipulated all the time. Someone gives you something of a small scale, like a trinket, and then they want you to do $1 million deal with them.
Yeah.
But it is as ethical as can be as long as you keep it on the same scale. So it's unprincipled. I did you a favor and now I expect you to sell your kids.
Yeah.
Cults will do this. They give you a flower and then they say, come join my cult. But it's a law nonetheless. People are more inclined to do something for you when they feel they owe you.
Yes.
So the fact that it can be abused does not take it off the radar. It's the currency of civilization. We want reciprocal relationships. And I experienced this one time. We had a neighbor and I saw her out the window walking toward us in holiday season with obviously some sort of plate of goodies. She was bringing me Christmas cheer. Didn't know her real well. She was fairly new to the neighborhood, but I felt I didn't want to answer the door. I felt guilty. She's doing a good thing. She's expecting nothing in return. She's just doing a good. But I almost didn't open the door because I'm like, I should have gotten her something. I felt like I owed her. And we see this with who's going to pick up the check, this little game. It's not that they love to pick up the check. They don't want to feel they owe you. And I asked the class, how long do you think it was after I did open the door, I didn't chicken out and said thank you, how long do you think it was before something went back the other way? And they said same day. I said, you're right. She didn't feel I owed her. I felt I owed her. And I remember one time, my dear friend, she's deceased now, Pat Wenzel, I still remember this. I tell this on reciprocity too. We went apple picking. And we got lots of bags of apples and they were really good. We went to Michigan and I gave her 2 bags of apples, not expecting anything in return. And I was working in their basement at the time and down the stairs she came with an apple pie. And I thought, this is great. A couple days went by and an apple pie came because her reciprocity was still on the same scale and she didn't come back with $1,000, but it had expanded. I didn't even know how to make an apple pie. She converted my apples into apple pie. So reciprocity is good, and be careful. People will manipulate it. Right. And they will make you feel like you owe them all the time. The cult leaders, the despots, the dictators. But when you look at your friends, you realize you want to give them without expecting any return. That's true giving. It's wages, if not. If I say, I'll give you apples if you give me apple pie, that's a different transaction altogether. It's not wrong, it's just a different transaction. Can you convert these apples into apple pie? But when I give it with no expectation of return and it comes back multiplied, that's spiritual.
So beautiful. And so what's the sixth one?
I did cover them all. Reciprocity, scarcity, authority, commitment and consistency, liking, and social proof.
Scarcity. We missed out on that.
Did we talk about scarcity? I thought I'd mentioned scarcity.
No.
Oh my God. And those two are so obvious that I thought I mentioned both of them. But scarcity means that people perceive greater value when it's scarce. And we know this at a concert when we'll spend $10 on a summer day for a bottle of water because you can't go out and get it. We also know it gets manipulated. I remember a radio ad that for 10 years they said, hurry while supplies last. And I learned that they lasted for years. And so they lie. And every Christmas, there's something that they deliberately manufacture less than. And here's where they tie together. By the way, combinations are where the really power is. Aunt MJ said she would get her niece this particular hot doll that said they can't get enough of. She will go all over the world, even when this girl would take something else, because by gosh, I promised my precious aunt. And we get insane over it. And so scarcity says, and they're all, when you go after Christmas, there's more of these dolls. It never was a manufacturing issue at all. It was a manipulation of the law of scarcity.
Yeah. A lot of people do that, even in businesses, like to sell their products, that we are only having it for a limited time or take it off.
How you evaluate it to not be manipulated is if something's scarce and I don't want it anyway, I don't care how many there are, right? The supplies, I don't even remember what that ad was on the radio, but it never bothered me that the supplies might run out.
Yeah.
And first of all, how much value do I have in it? And secondly, is it true? And sometimes marketers don't take into account truth at all, but we want to. And I also see people giving away their time. And then that's where you want to power up a little bit. You treat it as though your time was infinite. So even though people abuse that on the negative side, they under leverage it on the positive side. So it might sound like this. I would like to help, I'd be delighted to help you on this project. And I'm sure you would do the same for me. I'm asking for reciprocity. But if I say no problem and I smile, where are you going to go every time you have a project that could use my help? To me.
Yeah. So in short, if I have to bring it all together, what is the winning process?
So the first step of a strategy is to define and identify the win. Then the next part of the process is to align that win with what you're becoming and process the resistance. I call it the butt box. Whenever you have an idea outside your familiar zone, you will have some version of this. I would, but I don't have the time. I would, but I don't have the money. I would, but I'm not smart enough. So we process the butt box. So one is be clear of what a win looks like. Two is align it to our purpose and value system. How important is this? So we don't get in our own commitment and consistency trap. So once we've done that inner work, then planning is part of momentum. There's a tendency to skip all of that. And that's why people say strategy is a plan. When I first got into business, I had a business plan suitable for framing because I went to the library, I got all these resources. It was really good, but I wasn't thinking, well, who's going to do all this stuff? So the plan wasn't connected to a strategy. It had no hope of winning. But if you evaluated the plan, it was pretty well written. And the world is full of good plans, which is why Eisenhower said, planning is essential. Plans are useless. And we think strategy and plan are the same thing. No, strategy results in a plan, but if it's not aligned, the plan is not where we want to start.
Yeah. So how can we find success without compromising on our values?
I would ask you rephrase that. let me feedback what you said. How can we find success without compromising our values? Why does that instantly need to be reframed? What assumption can you make from the way that you stated that?
That success is dependent only when values are compromised.
Yeah, built into the way you asked that, and you're
Right.
asking me for a trick around it, is an assumption that true success will require compromising our value, unless we can find someone that can help us to get around that. Some hack for that. There's no hack for that. Life is a series of trade offs. I don't know how to do this without using a religious framework, but it's called in a religious concept the ordering of loves, meaning I love my work fits in your success plan. I put everything into my work and I'm doing it for my family. And your family says, we never see you. We'd rather have mom around than the extra vacation house that we've gotten. So you're making trade offs. I'm going to answer the first part of the question, which is how do we find success? And I would answer it, we find success by understanding our moral framework and then finding external fulfillments of our talents. We got to invest our talent somewhere. And so there are trade-offs, but there aren't really compromise.
Got it.
Compromise is when you set something down of a higher nature and pick up something of a lower nature. And we don't want compromises. Trade-offs are part of the process. Listen, you are not negotiating the higher. You are negotiating the lower, and you're making trade-offs. If you're trading on the moral level, all trade-offs are losses. There is no success in that. You might get the money.
No, I love that distinction. So thank you
The
for
way
enlightening.
you asked the question mattered. That's why I said rephrase it. Because
Right.
the way you were asking it was a way I couldn't answer it, because the assumption is,
That
that
it's
you need some special hack. You
right.
don't. You need a process for making space for what matters most. And in that, there will be trade-offs. Your work deserves the best you can give it within your framework of success, but no more than that. And that changes over time. Now my wife's retired and my kids are grown. It just changes when I have 3 small kids, and we need to be aware of the season. But the values need to stay ordered. And within that, you can't have a marriage without making trade-offs, but you don't compromise the value. And there's a big difference. It's not just semantics.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And it's valuable learning for me. I appreciate that so much.
You're
So,
welcome.
well, lots to ponder. I think I'll have to go back and listen to a few insights that you give throughout so that they stay. I need to hear them, I think, a couple of more times because it's learning and for the learning to stay because you've shared such valuable nuggets. I can't even tell you, like right here. I learned so much in the last 5 minutes itself.
Thank you.
But anyway, thank you so much for your time, Tom.
Well,
I am so grateful. And this has been just wonderful. I've learned so much and I've grown so much from learning from you.
I appreciate what you're doing, and any way I can contribute, I'm game, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and finding ways we can do positive damage together.
I look forward to that.